incident that occurred during my military experience. It happened back in 1969. I was in the naval branch of the service between the years of 1968 and 1971. I did 2 tours of duty, one at Naval Communications Station in San Francisco, and in Vietnam I was on a riverboat repair barge going up down the Mekong, and I had a combat action medal. I held a high-level security clearance. I had a top secret crypto level 14 with extra sensitive material access, which I believe was due to my father being a career Marine man. During a tour of duty in San Francisco, I worked at a secret complex. The building was called the Blockhouse. Everybody was given a security badge, and there were different colors for different access and different compartmentized areas. In that particular era, the primary ship-to-shore communication methods were teletype, which going through encryption crypto equipment, and Morse code. The code circuits were basically used when atmospheric conditions on the planet provided poor communication abilities, and Morse code was a backup for last resort communications. I was certified in repair and maintenance of the teletype and radio communications equipment. I held a high-speed teletype operator certification as well as high-speed Morse code. I was put in charge of the code room. Code room was a 25 by 25 foot room with communication receivers wall to wall. I was sitting in the middle of the room. 8 speakers would be going with static and Morse code going. I'd be listening for the station's call letters for the different ships. I'd be communicating with both military and merchant marine ships. This communication base was the main communication link for the entire western United States. It held all the different levels of security communications from unclassified all the way up to top secret. During my tour of duty there, I experienced several messages, top secret. Most of it was routine with admirals pointing out each other's mistakes and things like that. Nothing really of any unusual nature. One day, I had a very unusual experience in that a ship out at sea near Alaskan coast, was a merchant marine ship, sent in a message. I heard the call letters. I went into the seat, threw on my headphones, replied back to the ship. It sent in a priority message. The message was classified as secret. Now, this is highly unusual. My 2 years of handling messages for a unsecure circuit, meaning that any high school ham radio operator could tune to this frequency and decode it Morse code. The secret message being sent over on secure circuit is highly unusual, meaning the protocol was broken for handling normal messages. The message had the following content. I don't remember all the specifics of latitude, longitude, or the name of the ship, but I do remember very vividly the details of what the content of the message was. The message revealed that coming out of the ocean, very near the ship off port bow, a reddish-orange, glowing, elliptical object, approximately 70 feet in diameter, came out of the water, shot off into space. The ship's radar tracked it as going over 7,000 miles per hour. This message made me wonder about the whole reason why this protocol was broken, why it was classified as secret. It always stuck with me to this day. I've had an experience myself personally of seeing some type of craft like this was glowing and kind of a greenish-white glow in the mountains outside Arizona. My brother, we were driving up the mountain road and yanked me out of the truck and said, "Look, look!" And I said, "What is it?" And he pointed up, and about 150 feet above me was this craft. It was totally quiet. It was glowing, and it went across the desert, and it did a right-angle turn. And anyway, my UFO interest has stemmed from this one particular incident back in the military, and that's why I wish to record.
Do you remember about the date of this event?
Yeah, it was 1969.
But I mean, time of year or anything?
Don't remember that much detail.
And do you have any idea what happened to this message or what action was taken on it?
What happens is when a message like that, it was classified as priority, which means that it needed to be handled much faster than a routine message. I typed out the message, took it into the communication officer. They processed it and sent it off to a very high level of command.
And was any action taken that you know of in terms of following up, or would that have been outside your purview?
Well, I was, nothing followed after that. I was not notified of any action after that. I was hoping maybe something would appear. I looked in the newspaper the day after, hoping maybe something would appear in the newspaper, something unusual like this. I knew nothing about UFOs at that time, and I saw nothing on any newspaper, and I just wondered why something like this would be classified as secret.
In your career in other capacities, before or after this event, had you heard of other subject or other sightings within the military?
Absolutely. After I finished military service, I worked for 13 years at the Naval Electronic Communication Engineering Center in San Diego. I worked with some of the personnel that worked at NORADs. We were talking about UFOs. He said, when I first started working there, quote, that the screens which monitored the radar across the country, all of a sudden something would come on across the screen, and the scale that would, reading the speed on this thing would go off the scale, and the thing would shoot across, and one of the older supervisors advised him, oh, just a visit from one of our little friends, like just normal occurrence.
Did they give you any idea of the velocity of the object?
I don't know the details on that one.
And this was NORAD related?
This is NORAD.
What do you say to people like Webster Hubble, who were told by NORAD that they have no knowledge of this subject and don't track them?
What can you say?
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, you know, I did get to know. I had no qualms after that. I was a truth seeker looking for information on flying saucers.
We're rolling. First thing I'd like you to do, if you can just give me your name and give us sort of an overview of your military career.
My name is Donald M. Ware from Fort Walton Beach, Florida. I graduated from Duke University 1957 and got a commission in the U.S. Air Force at the same time. After 10 months working for North American Aviation, I went on active duty for 26 years, retired at the end of '82. I spent the first 10 years as a fighter pilot flying F-100s and F-105s, 2 combat tours in Vietnam. Then I got a master's degree in nuclear engineering, worked in teaching, testing, research, ended up in the headquarters in Europe.
And what was your rank when you retired?
Retired as lieutenant colonel.
And tell me about the event that happened in Washington that you saw.
I was 16 years old, walking down the street a block from my home, 11:30 in the evening, and looked up and saw 7 red lights, kind of star-like lights, but they were a brightness equal to Venus on its brightest, maybe a minus 4.5. And they were wandering around in somewhat random motion over Washington. And my thoughts were, gee, is this what I read about in the newspapers last Sunday morning? And because the the Washington Star, which we get, said flying saucers were. And so nothing much more was happening after 10 minutes. They were still wandering around, and I went on to bed and got up anxious the next morning to see what the paper said, and sure enough, headlines again about flying saucers over Washington. I've read investigation of, I believe it was Howard Blum, the NBC hotshot investigator on that case, and it's very interesting. In the Air Force, my next-door neighbor happened to be head of the radar facility on the Air Force Base, but on that night, which was 26 July 1952, he was in the Washington. He worked for FAA, and he was in the tower at Washington National Airport, where a lot of the action was going on, and he told me about what he was seeing. And there were a few other people. What I learned basically is that perhaps hundreds of people saw them that night, and one of them was seen to leave the radar scope at least 7,000 miles an hour, so one investigator said. Another one appeared to follow one of the interceptors around the sky. There were some, I believe, F-94s or something, one of those early fighters, sent up from Dover. They had been moved from Andrews to Dover for temporary repairs on their facility. And I was told that the guys at Operation Blue Book at Wright Pat didn't find out about what was going on until the next morning, which kind of tells you where they were in the loop of things. They were just, in my opinion, the Air Force's public relations agent. And when the unidentified objects left, after the interceptors came up, they came back and stayed until something like 4:30 in the morning. After the interceptors ran out of gas and went home. So my assessment now is that these folks, it took me 2 years of investigation to determine that I think these were alien vehicles. They were, some UFOs I decided were controlled by a more advanced intelligence. And right now, when I think about the Gulf Breeze sightings, which I've seen on 8 occasions, I've seen similar lights on 8 occasions. Some of them were a red plasma that hang below the Gulf Breeze Type 2 vehicle, and some of them were a 2-foot diameter red light on unmanned vehicles, disc 8 feet in diameter. So I don't know what they were, but I'm sure they were controlled by some advanced intelligence.
What if you started to talk about this radar person at Washington National Airport, but you didn't state for the record what he saw. Can you go into what he said he saw on the radar? Or if he saw it on the radar? You never really said as a statement.
Well, his name was Herbert Ingram, and I think, I can't remember in detail what he said he saw.
But did he see them on radar?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean,
Well, you need to incorporate my question in your answer, because they won't hear it. I guess I want to, let me put a pause on. There we go.
Yes, I did meet Herbert Ingram later, who worked in the tower that night at Washington National Airport, and he said he did see them on radar. And I also have heard the briefing of, I think it was Dewey Fournay, who was in the tower that night also. And he said that he used the data from his files at the Air Force Pentagon files there to brief the Robertson panel, and he had a number of cases that had UFOs seen visually and on radar from the ground and visually and on radar from the air all at the same time.
Great. Now, could you also, why do you think these, for 2 weeks in a row, there were these objects over Washington at that time frame in 1952? I think it's very interesting.
I think the reason this happened, in hindsight, is that some aliens put on a demonstration over Washington, which was becoming the capital of the world, to an extent that the media could not ignore it and the government could not cover it up, although they made serious attempts, and they did allow those people who aren't ready for the alien presence not to have to think about it. But that was, I think, a major step in raising the consciousness of a number of people. I know I certainly became a truth seeker as a result of what I saw that night.
Now, Tell me about some of these. I think that's great. Some of the things that you learned in your Air Force career in speaking to other pilots or other Air Force personnel. I think if you can just kind of summarize some of the salient.
I have had no information from any official source about the alien presence while I was in the Air Force. But I had no qualms about talking to it about anybody. And I have met 6 people in the Air Force who have seen alien vehicles up close and told me their stories, and I knew they wouldn't lie to me, so I was pretty comfortable with the whole idea throughout my career. The first one was a young Navy fellow who in 1957 was on a picket submarine in the North Atlantic. On the surface, he had the watch that night. He had a camera with him set up to take pictures of the phosphorescence caused by the props disturbing the bacteria. He saw a greenish glow under the water beside the sub. And he knew that shouldn't be there, and so he called the first mate to the bridge, and the first mate arrived as this thing was rising toward the surface. And the first mate called the captain to the bridge, and the captain arrived about the time a 30-foot diameter, about 1,600 feet off the side of the ship, they estimate 30 feet in diameter, with this greenish glow around it, rose slowly out of the water. And he got a picture of it just breaking the water, and several more on the way up. They picked it up on the radar and tracked it up into space. He told me that 6 months earlier, that group of picket subs and ships had tracked an unidentified object at 70,000 feet and 3,600 miles an hour from Iceland down to the Caribbean before they lost it. Another case, I was the Tactical Air Command's representative on the test of the new boom for the KC-10. And we were at Edwards Air Force Base, and the civilian photographer working on our project, who had been working there for 20 years, said that in 1968, he was on the range manning a theodolite tracking camera and saw a flying saucer. And they put the camera on it, and they took pictures for quite a while in broad daylight, clear in 100. 25 millimeter high-speed film that has recorded on it azimuth, elevation, range, and time. They took the film to the base photo lab that evening, turned it in as standard mission film, didn't tell anybody what was on it, came back early the next morning to pick it up. Not only was the film gone, all records they'd turned it in was gone. And I understand that case had been investigated by some well-known investigators before.
Other significant accounts you can recall?
Yeah, I got a mental block now trying to think.
We'll go back to the other one for a minute, the one with the Navy guy. What happened to that data?
Oh.
How was that handled?
Yeah. The young Navy man on the picket submarine said that the captain followed standard operating procedures at that time, and they took his camera and sent it to Foreign Technology Division. He never got his camera back, but the Navy bought him a new camera about a month later. It's been a while since I've told these stories, so,
These are great.
so I'm trying to think of...
Are any of these guys still living, or have you been in touch with them so they could be interviewed directly? Or?
I don't know. The first guy was a guy that was just traveling across country with me when I was on my way to my first job in LA.
Oh, yeah. That's good.
Okay. I had a really interesting experience in January of 1988. I had a phone call from a lady in Orlando, says, I need to talk to you. I said, what do you want to talk about? She says, I need to talk to you face to face. Says, okay. She called it Sunday evening. Says, how about 9 o'clock Wednesday morning? I got free time. She said, I'll be there, and she did with another lady. And first she handed me a little book she'd written called Psychics Don't Scare Me Anymore. And then she gave me a message that she said that she was directed to give to me. And the message said, I wrote it down, there's something going on the Eglin Air Force Base reservation involving nuclear weaponry that concerns them. It's like playing Russian roulette. Well, I've got a master's in nuclear engineering. I'd worked in the testing business at Eglin for 3 years. I knew that no one on that base would consider setting off any kind of nuclear weapon on the land ranges or the water ranges. It made no sense to me. I forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I woke up, and the first thought in my mind was, you dummy, that lady drove 600 miles to give you that message. So I consulted with another retired colonel to ask him what he thought I'd do about it, or whether I'd do anything about it. And he said, yeah, I think it's important. You ought to do something about it. The only thing I do is to pass it on to some general at Eglin to figure maybe he knew what to do about it. And so I picked the general that had the highest formal education at that time, because the Gallup poll said there was a direct relationship between higher education and acceptance of extraterrestrial intelligence. I called his secretary Thursday noon and said, this is Lieutenant Colonel Don Ware, U.S. Air Force retired. I'd like an appointment with General so-and-so. She said, his next open appointment is Tuesday morning. I said, sorry, that's too late. It's going to have to be this afternoon or tomorrow morning. I'm leaving town. What do you want to talk to him about? I have some information from an unusual source I want to give him directly. 5 minutes max. She said, okay, I'll squeeze you in between the 2 staff meetings tomorrow morning. Fine. I was there. His aide, Lieutenant Colonel, was dying to know what I wanted to talk to him about. I wouldn't tell him. He came out of the staff meetings, saw me, motioned me into his office, and I gave him the briefing on what the message said, the circumstances under which I got it. I opened my briefcase, same black briefcase I carry now. I took out the hard copy that you normally give generals after you brief them. I had under it Ed Walters' photograph of the Gulf Breeze Type 1 vehicle he had just taken, not long before. Nobody had seen it except the other investigator that was working with me on that case. And he saw it. I wanted him to see it, and he did see it in my briefcase when I uncovered it and pointed to it and said, may I look at that? And I handed it to him, and he looked at it, smiled, and he said, very interesting. But before that, his reaction to my statement was that I don't know everything going on this reservation, but I know who does, and I will make sure they get the information. Now, later, I was contacted by Leah Haley, and she said, I need to talk to you. Bud Hopkins and Linda Howe and all tell me that you're the one I need to talk to learn about what's going on around Gulf Breeze. And she had these flashbacks about the Gulf Breeze incident. So I said, sure, come on down. She and her husband came down to spend the weekend with me, and all Saturday afternoon they told me about what was happening in her life with what she was uncovering with her regressions. And then I told her about everything that's going on around Gulf Breeze, Pensacola. And she apparently had been on board an alien vehicle when she said she felt a jolt, and then she felt a falling sensation, which you don't normally feel when you're on board alien vehicles, and then she thinks she might have lost consciousness briefly, because the next thing she knew, she was on the floor and the door was open. She went out. There was a guy in a military uniform with one of these little 3.5, 4 foot tall, big-headed, big-eyed guys with the almond-shaped eyes over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. She said she walked behind him, and this guy was pleading for her protection telepathically. There's a helicopter overhead. It was about 30 minutes before sunrise, and the loudspeaker was saying, don't move, stay right where you are. She saw the ship 200 or 300 yards out beyond the underwater sandbar out there that she had seen out of the window of the vehicle. And they dropped a rope ladder over, and a couple of guys came down. They came in a raft and picked her up, took her back up there, up the rope ladder. She's wearing her panties. That's what the aliens pick her up in. Another alien on the deck pleading for her protection. They give her a shot in the arm. She says it's an escorter down the stairs. She says the deck was warmer above decks than it was below decks, telling me as an investigator it's summertime. Water temperature out there is about 84 in the summer, and they keep it about 74 below. She got dizzy at the bottom step, sat down on the bottom step, put her head in her hands, and lost consciousness. Next thing she knows, it's broad daylight. She's being escorted off of an airplane that she's told not to look at. She says it had a dark wing, into an American-made light blue sedan, but no writing on it, but it's the kind that the Air Force uses, taken to the back door of a hotel. One guy, she's wearing somebody's raincoat now. One guy stayed with her in the back hall while the other one went and got a key. She says they were changing the breakfast trays in the breakfast buffet. She saw no clock. We don't know what time it was. Went upstairs. One guy went in the room with her husband, a medical doctor, and the other one kept her out in the hall. She said for a long time before he gave her another shot, and she slithered down the wall, losing consciousness. The interesting thing to me is that she and her husband woke up the next morning with no recall of anything that happened that night. I've always known that when aliens pick you up, they use telepathic processes to selectively block your memories. But this tells me that somebody in some government on this planet uses a drug-assisted hypnotic process to do the same thing. Now, she came back later when she had found out where the hotel was. She said, I want to find out where it happened, now that I know where I got picked up from and when it happened, because she'd figured out the dates. It was early August '88. And I said, well, there's 100 miles of that white sand beach you described, that low sand dunes and sea oats and all that. But there's 13 miles of it between Navarre and Fort Walton Beach. It's Eglin Air Force property, and that's where the Air Force guys are likely to get in a hurry. So the only way to see that is to walk 13 miles of slanted sand. Are you up to it? She says, sure. So we left her car in my driveway, my car at Fort Walton, and Colonel Reed's car. We went to Navarre, and she had a camera, we had binoculars, and we started walking 5 miles down the beach. She said, stop. She says, this kind of looks like the place I got out of that vehicle. She faced all 4 directions. She says, it feels like the place I got out of the vehicle. We made a mental note and continued about a mile down the road. We came to a flatbed with a phased array radar on it with some security around it, facing at a low angle of elevation northwest toward the water south Gulf breeze. Took photographs, continued a mile farther. We found another fence with a strange device. Big, it's painted white like sand, white base, big horseshoe, big donut in the middle, omnidirectional device. The donut was 6 feet across, maybe about yay wide, with little black plugs going around it, telling me that it was packed core, a carbon core rather than a wound core. Cable the size of my arm going to it, and going into a shed with no windows but air conditioning. Same kind of sensors you have around missile silo sites, wooden access stand, comm tower, warning light, that's the scene. Took photographs. There's a convex disc in the middle of the donut. It was pointing in the same direction as the phased array radar, probably slave to it. And I think I found out later that was a directed electromagnetic device, pulse magnetic device, which can, cause significant currents in any conductor, and is a pretty good weapon for whatever. And I had that verified. The first time I talked about that, I showed a picture of that device, and a gentleman in San Diego said, I was speaking at San Diego UFO Society, and he said, when I saw the picture, I got chills up and down my spine. I'm the engineer that made the drawings for the company that built that device, and you have correctly named it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway,
what company made it?
I don't remember. It was one of those things that.
We're going to need to go downstairs.
Yeah. Well, one quick point. I said, gee, could this incident have anything to do with that message that the lady brought me? And I called her and I says, look, do you have the notes from that message you brought me back in January '88? And she says, well, I don't know. I'll look for them. If I find them, I'll call you back. She called me back, and I says, why did you use the term nuclear weaponry? She says, well, I get both images and words. But for that phrase, I got a missile-like thing pointing up and a mushroom cloud. But she got it out of sequence. If she had said a weapon that could cause a nuclear explosion or a big explosion, then the message makes real sense. Because if you hit an alien vehicle with a directed EMP device, you could destabilize a power system and it'll go bang in your face, or when it hits the ground, it could go bang in your face. But it is a non-lethal weapon. Nobody on that vehicle was hurt. It was cruising low over the beach, and it just they lost their ability to stay in the air, and it just came down and those guys got captured. Now, I asked myself why that happened, and the only thing that made sense to me is that the cameras of hard copy, unsolved mysteries, and current affair, all three were in Gulf Breeze that weekend trying to get pictures like Ed Walters was getting. And I think if he had gotten those pictures, then the powers to be would not be able to comply with their policy of keeping the public from getting too excited about the alien presence. So somebody in the government probably told these aliens to stay away from Gulf Breeze, and when they didn't do it, they sent them a message with a non-lethal weapon. I think that's what happened.
Thank you. This is the weapon system that put out the electromagnetic pulse that was discussed by Don Ware. I will zoom in on it now. And this is the system that was thought to have used the electromagnetic pulse to knock down the extraterrestrial vehicle, and about which he warned the military that this was like playing Russian roulette. See what it does? Just buttering this on. It goes. Got it. Swear to God.